What's not confusing is that Tasmanians will be paying more for their water. I spoke to the economic regulator about what he took into account a short time ago. Glenn Appleyard, thanks for joining us. Most people are going to be slugged an extra $100 or more on their water and sewage bills. To what extent did you take into account cost of living pressures that so many are already struggling with?
Ellie, clearly we're aware of the cost of living pressures which the community faces, but in terms of the requirements that are given to the economic regulator, that's not a factor that we're obliged to give concern to. That is assistance for the disadvantaged. What we're asked to do is ensure that any price increases don't come as price shocks to consumers.
Are Tasmanians, though, going to cop it because of poor performance by councils over many years?
We certainly face a backlog of much needed infrastructure. We need a lot more capital investment to improve the quality of water. There are several places throughout the state where clearly there needs to be improvements to water schemes. And
is that a nice way of saying yes?
I guess in the short term, had there not been a lack of capital investment in the past, we wouldn't be facing the increases that we are now. So in a sense, it is a catch-up phase.
How many Tasmanians are going to have their prices go up by the maximum amount? I mean, have the majority, therefore, not been paying enough?
That's clearly the case, and it tends to be the case in all three corporations, but to differing degrees. Because we've come from the situation where previously 29 councils undertook both the delivery of the service as well as the charging for the service, there is a raft of different pricing arrangements, and some will clearly face increased bills, others will face moratoriums on their bills. Just where they turn out, that will really depend upon their own personal situation, and of course going forward on how much water they use, because we'll have two-part tariffs.
Did you do any comparisons with prices interstate?
Yes, we did. Within the draft report which we've published, there are several sections where we've drawn comparisons both in terms of the standard of the service, that is the size of the treatment plants, as well as availability of water, as well as the costs that consumers face.
And how does Tasmania compare? Yeah.
Well, surprisingly, we come, I guess, within the middle of the range. There are some where it's more expensive, there are others where it's less expensive. But to look at comparable schemes, clearly we don't have the advantage of them having undertaken these sorts of pricing arrangements in the past. So we do face a catch-up phase.
Although you didn't look at it, in your view, would it be better to have the one water corporation for the state?
Well, this isn't a matter for the regulator, this is a matter for the government and the parliaments.
But given the research that you've done, you must have formed an opinion.
There are certain economies of scale which could be achieved by having a single corporation, but again, Ellie, if you look in the report at the tables where we've compared with other water corporations, the sheer size of the consumer base isn't necessarily the dominant factor. Generally speaking, yes, there are certain economies to be gained by having a single corporation.
Now, you've recommended caps on the fixed charges to 10% or $100, whichever is greater.
Yes.
But the bills could in fact go up by even more, couldn't they? It really does hinge on how much water consumers used. You've had an assumption of 200 kilolitres.
That's correct for the south. In the north and the northwest, of course, where they've already had metering for some time, those price caps will of course be affected by the volume of water. So in those circumstances, regardless of the price caps, were a consumer to use less water than they did in the previous year, they'll face a reduced bill. If they use more water than they did in the previous year, then naturally they'll meet an increased charge.
So
but that's something for which the north and the northwest consumers are quite accustomed to.
So if you have a large family, we're talking about the south of the state then when the two-part pricing is coming in, if you have a large family, I mean, you could be in for significantly more than the 10%, couldn't you?
I guess it's possible, Ellie, although the driver, I think, is more the purposes of using water outside of the home itself. 200 kilolitres accounts to 23 litres per hour, per day, per week, per year. And it is quite a generous allowance, particularly when compared with arrangements in other states, and as already exists in the north and the northwest.
Given that the fixed charge then makes up about 80% of the bill, Will that stay in terms of ongoing determinations? Because if 20% of the price is based on consumption, where is the incentive then to reduce consumption?
Well, we think in this first price determination, which runs for the first 3 years, it does give a signal to consumers concerning the volume of water used. Of course, when we come to the next determination in 3 years' time, that issue will be up for re-examination.
And next, as the economic regulator, you'll be looking at increases to electricity prices.
We'll certainly be looking at electricity prices as to whether they increase or not. That remains to come out in the determination.
More for the hip pocket. Glenn Appleyard, we're out of time.
Thanks very much, Ellen.